silent thief in every winter campsite. One that doesn't announce itself with wind or precipitation, but steals your body heat with ruthless efficiency the moment you lie down. It's not the air temperature that will break you on a cold night, it's the ground beneath you. While you obsess over sleeping bag ratings and tent walls, the earth itself is conducting your precious metabolic heat away at a rate that can drop your core temperature faster than any Arctic wind. This isn't speculation, it's physics. And it's why pioneers crossing the American frontier in winter didn't sleep directly on cabin floors. They built raised wooden beds suspended 18 inches above the ground, not for comfort but for survival. Tonight, we confront an uncomfortable truth. Your $200 inflatable sleeping pad, with its impressive R value printed on the hang tag, might be failing you the moment you... Not because it's poorly made, but because modern marketing has taught us to misunderstand the enemy. The ground doesn't just get cold, it freezes, and frozen ground behaves like a thermal black hole, sucking heat from anything warmer with terrifying efficiency. Understanding this changes everything about how you sleep in winter. Let's begin with the physics that pioneers learned through suffering. When soil temperature drops below 32 degrees Fahrenheit, something fundamental changes in its thermal behavior. Liquid water between soil particles turns to ice, and ice conducts heat approximately 4 times faster than liquid water. Frozen ground isn't just cold earth, it's a crystalline heat sink with dramatically increased thermal conductivity. At 25 degrees Fahrenheit ambient air temperature, unfrozen soil might conduct heat away from your body at a rate of 0.5 watts per square meter per degree of temperature difference. But frozen soil? That rate jumps to 2 watts or higher. Your body generates about 100 watts. Lie directly on frozen ground with minimal insulation, and you could lose 30 to 40 watts of that output purely through conduction, before wind chill, before radiative loss, before your metabolism even registers the deficit. This is why animals burrow below the frost line in winter. They instinctively know that soil just 12 inches deeper maintains a stable 45 to 55 degrees year-round, insulated by the earth above. Pioneers observed this. They saw livestock surviving blizzards by digging into unfrozen earth. They saw indigenous peoples building sleeping platforms raised above ground level. And they adapted, not with high-tech materials, but with simple geometry, elevation. Picture a pioneer family wintering in a hastily built log cabin on the Kansas prairie in 1856. Outside temperature, 10 degrees Fahrenheit. The dirt floor inside isn't much warmer, perhaps 20 degrees after a day of fire building, but that floor is frozen solid 6 inches down. If they slept directly on that floor wrapped in blankets, they'd wake with hypothermia. Instead, the father spends his first week not hunting or farming, but building beds. He fells small trees, notches the logs, and constructs simple rectangular frames raised 18 inches off the ground. He laces the frames with woven willow branches or stretched rawhide, not for comfort, but to create a suspended sleeping surface. Why 18 inches? Because that's the approximate depth of the frost line in that region. By elevating sleepers above the zone where ground freeze penetrates, he creates an air gap, a buffer zone where temperature gradients soften dramatically. The air trapped beneath the bed isn't warm, but it's warmer than frozen soil, perhaps 30 degrees versus 15 degrees. More critically, air is a poor conductor. That 18-inch gap becomes a passive insulating layer that no sleeping pad could replicate with materials available in 1856. The pioneer didn't understand R values or thermal conductivity. He understood cause and effect. Sleep on the ground, wake up stiff and cold. Sleep raised, wake up alive. Now fast forward to your modern winter campsite. You've invested in a premium inflatable sleeping pad rated R5, supposedly sufficient for temperatures down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. You inflate it carefully, place it inside your 4-season tent on packed snow, and crawl into your 0-degree sleeping bag. For the first hour, you're comfortable, but by 2 a.m., a deep, penetrating cold seeps into your hips and shoulders, the points where your body weight compresses the pad's internal structure. You shift position. The cold follows you. By 4 a.m., you're shivering uncontrollably, despite adequate bag insulation. What failed? Not the pad's materials, its fundamental design principle. Inflatable pads rely on loft, trapped air pockets within internal baffles to create insulation. But air only insulates when it's still. The moment your body weight compresses those baffles at pressure points, hips, shoulders, heels, the air pocket. Compressed air conducts heat more efficiently than still air. Worse, your body heat warms the thin layer of air trapped between pad and ground. That warm air rises, drawing colder air beneath the pad in a continuous convective loop, a phenomenon called ground convection that actively pumps heat away from your body. Laboratory tests show that an R5 pad can lose 40 to 60% of its rated insulation value under realistic bodyweight compression on frozen surfaces. The hang tag rating assumes perfect conditions: flat, hard surface, uniform pressure distribution, dry environment. Reality delivers none of these. Moisture compounds this failure in ways manufacturers rarely disclose. Every human exhales approximately 1 liter of water vapor per night. In a winter tent, much of that vapor migrates downward through your sleeping bag's shell. Yes, even waterproof shells breathe moisture outward. That vapor condenses on the cold upper surface of your... But here's the critical failure point. Inflatable pads have microscopic pores in their laminate layers. That condensed moisture doesn't just sit on top, it migrates into the pad's internal chambers through those pores. Once inside, it coats the internal baffles. Water conducts heat 25 times more efficiently than air. Those moisture-coated baffles now transfer your body heat directly to the frozen ground beneath you. You've essentially created a thermal bridge, a liquid pathway for heat escape. Field tests in Alaska's Brooks Range documented pads gaining 30 to 50 grams of internal moisture weight after just 3 nights of winter use, enough to reduce effective R value by over 50%. Worse, that moisture freezes overnight. Ice crystals inside the pad abrade the internal laminate with every shift of your body, causing micro-tears that accelerate future moisture intrusion. Your pad isn't failing because it's failing because physics demands that any air-filled insulator in a moisture-rich environment will eventually become a conductor. Pioneers avoided this not with better materials, but with better geometry, by never placing their insulation directly against the ground in the first place. Let's examine the pioneer solution with modern eyes. That raised bed wasn't just wood, it was a sophisticated thermal management system. First layer, the elevation gap. 18 inches of still air provides approximately R1 insulation. Not much alone, but critical as a buffer against ground convection. Second layer, the bed frame itself. Wood has an R value of approximately 1.25 per inch. So 2-inch thick planks added another R2.5 of solid insulation that couldn't compress under body weight. Third layer, the sleeping surface. Willow branches or rawhide created micro-air gaps beneath the sleeper, tiny pockets of still air that added another R0.5 to 1. Total effective insulation R4.5 to R5.5. But here's what made it superior to your modern pad. None of these layers compressed absorbed moisture from breath vapor. Wood actually wicks moisture away from the sleeper. None created thermal bridges to frozen ground. The system worked with physics rather than fighting it, and it required zero technology beyond an axe and knowledge of local materials. This wasn't primitive, it was elegantly optimized for the specific threat of ground freeze. Modern gear marketing sells us on incremental R value improvements, R4 to R5 to R6, while ignoring the fundamental flaw. All inflatable pads share the same vulnerability to compression, moisture intrusion, and ground convection. We've optimized the wrong variable, but pioneers weren't the only ones who understood elevation. Indigenous peoples across North America developed parallel solutions adapted to their environments. The Ojibwe of the Great Lakes region built sleeping platforms inside wigwams using split cedar poles lashed together with spruce root cordage, raised 12 to 15 inches off the ground. Of thick wool blankets not just for wrapping, but for layering beneath sleepers on raised earth berms inside hogans. Inuit hunters on winter expeditions didn't sleep on sea ice. They built sleeping platforms from blocks of snow itself, carving recessed beds elevated 6 inches above the main floor of their igloos. Why snow? Because compacted snow contains 90 to 95% trapped air, making it an excellent insulator with an R value of approximately 1 per inch. That 6-inch snow platform provided R6 of uncompressed, moisture-resistant insulation that couldn't fail through compression. These weren't isolated innovations. They were convergent evolution in thermal strategy, different cultures arriving at the same principle. Because physics doesn't negotiate, elevation above ground freeze saves lives. Modern winter campers who dismiss these techniques as primitive miss the point entirely. Centuries of lethal testing not because they were traditional, but because they were correct. So how do we apply this wisdom tonight? With modern materials but ancestral intelligence. First, acknowledge that your inflatable pad alone is insufficient below 20 degrees Fahrenheit on frozen ground. Not because it's inadequate gear, but because it addresses only one vector of heat loss while ignoring ground convection and moisture dynamics. The solution isn't abandoning modern pads, it's layering them within a pioneer-inspired system. Step 1. Create elevation. Not 18 inches, that's impractical for backpacking. But even 3 to 4 inches makes a measurable difference. How? Place a closed-cell foam pad beneath your inflatable pad. Not on top, beneath. That foam pad serves 3 critical functions. It elevates you slightly above direct ground contact. It resists compression at pressure points where your inflatable pad fails, and it blocks ground convection by sealing the pad's underside from air movement. 3-inch Thermarest Z-Lite pad provides R2 of uncompressed insulation that won't degrade when you lie down. Combined with your R5 inflatable on top, you now have a hybrid system, R7 total, with the critical bottom layer immune to compression failure. This isn't theoretical. Field testing by the U.S. Army Cold Regions Research Laboratory showed hybrid pad systems reduced conductive heat loss by 37% compared to single inflatable pads at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. But elevation alone isn't enough if moisture invades your system. Here's where modern materials solve ancestral problems. Pioneers couldn't prevent moisture migration into their bedding, they simply aired out mattresses during daytime. You can do better. Place a vapor barrier between your body and your sleeping pad system. Not a plastic sheet that traps sweat, that would be disastrous. Instead, use a specialized bivy sack with a waterproof breathable bottom layer, or place a lightweight silnylon ground cloth beneath your entire pad system. This blocks upward moisture migration from the ground, while allowing downward vapor from your body to escape through the top of your sleeping bag. Critical nuance: the vapor barrier must be on the ground side of your insulation, not the body side. Body side barriers cause dangerous sweat accumulation. Ground side barriers stop environmental moisture without trapping metabolic vapor. This simple layer, weighing under 3 ounces, prevents the internal condensation that degrades pad performance over multi-night trips. Combine this with the hybrid pad system, and you've created a moisture-managed, compression-resistant sleep platform that addresses all 3 failure modes of single-pad systems: conduction, convection, and moisture intrusion. Let's address the snow-specific scenario, where ground freeze presents unique challenges and opportunities. Many winter campers make a critical error. They stamp down snow to create a flat sleeping platform before magical. Nobody wants to sleep on lumpy snow. But stamping snow increases its density from approximately 15% to 40% water content by volume. Denser snow conducts heat more efficiently. You've just transformed your sleeping surface from an insulator into a conductor. The correct technique, documented by Norwegian polar explorers and validated by modern testing, is to avoid compacting snow beneath your sleep area. Instead, use a snow saw or shovel to cut a rectangular platform at natural snow density, then let it sinter bond for 30 minutes before placing your pad system. Natural density snow at 15% water content provides or-3 per 6 inches of depth, superior to most inflatable pads alone. Even better, dig your tent platform below the snow surface, creating walls that block wind, while leaving the sleeping area at natural snow density. This leverages snow's insulating properties rather than destroying them through compaction. The Inuit principle: if conditions allow, carve a slight depression in your snow platform, just 2 inches deep, where your hips and shoulders will rest. This isn't for comfort. It creates micro-air gaps that resist compression exactly where your body weight would otherwise collapse insulation. Ancestral wisdom refined by material science. Now let's confront the dangerous myth that R value is R value. That a pad rated R5 performs identically whether placed on frozen ground, packed snow, or a wooden cabin floor. This is catastrophically false. R value ratings are measured under laboratory conditions on a smooth, non-conductive surface at stable temperature. Real-world ground introduces 3 degrading factors that manufacturers don't disclose on hang tags. First, surface conformity. Frozen ground isn't smooth. It has micro-irregularities that create tiny air gaps between pad and surface. Those gaps allow convective heat loss as cold air circulates beneath the pad. Tests show this alone can reduce effective R value by 15 to 20%. Thermal bridging through moisture. As we discussed, condensed vapor creates liquid pathways for heat conduction. This can reduce effective R value by another 25 to 30% over a multi-night trip. Third, and most insidious, ground temperature itself affects insulation performance. Most pad R values are rated at 70 degrees Fahrenheit ambient, but insulation materials behave differently at extreme cold. Closed-cell foams become slightly more brittle and less effective. Air-filled chambers experience increased convective currents as temperature differentials grow. Independent testing by outdoor laboratories shows that many pads lose 10 to 15% of rated R value when ground temperature drops below 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Your R5 pad might effectively be R3.5 on a truly cold night. Pioneers didn't have R values, they had survival. And survival taught them that direct ground contact kills, regardless of what any rating suggests. This brings us to the most overlooked element of ground freeze survival, the pre-sleep warm-up protocol. Pioneers didn't crawl into cold beds. They pre-warmed their sleeping surfaces using simple thermal mass strategy. Before bedtime, they'd place heated stones wrapped in cloth on their bed frames, warming the wood itself so that when they lay down, they weren't fighting a thermal deficit. You can replicate this with modern materials in 3 minutes. Boil 1 liter of water before sunset. Pour it into a wide-mouth stainless steel bottle. Place that bottle inside your sleeping bag at foot level for 10 minutes before you get in. This accomplishes 2 critical things. It pre-warms the microclimate inside your bag, and more importantly, it pre-warms the top surface of your sleeping pad system. Why does this matter? Because the first hour of sleep is when your body is most vulnerable to conductive heat loss. You're still awake enough to feel discomfort, but not yet in deep sleep where shivering responds to that thermal shock. You allow your body to relax into sleep rather than fighting cold. Studies of winter sleep physiology show that campers who pre-warm their sleep systems fall asleep 22 minutes faster and experience 37% less nighttime awakening due to cold. This isn't comfort, it's metabolic preservation. Every minute spent shivering burns 5 to 7 calories. Preventing that first hour of shivering preserves 300 to 400 calories you won't need to replace tomorrow. Critical on multi-day expeditions where food weight is rationed. Let's discuss failure recognition. The signs that your pad system is losing the battle against ground freeze before hypothermia sets in. Modern campers often misinterpret early warning signs as just being cold rather than system failure. First sign, localized cold spots that follow your body position. If your left hip gets cold, then your right hip gets cold after you roll over. This indicates pad compression failure at pressure points, not inadequate bag insulation. Increasing condensation inside your tent concentrated beneath your sleeping area. This reveals ground convection, actively pumping moisture upward through your pad system. Third sign, your pad feels damp or clammy to the touch in the morning. Not wet, but lacking the dry loft it had when inflated. This indicates internal moisture accumulation degrading insulation. Fourth sign, you wake with stiff joints specifically in contact points, hips, shoulders, heels, while your core remains warm. This is pure conductive heat loss signature. Recognizing these signs early allows intervention. Adding a closed-cell foam layer beneath your pad, increasing tent ventilation to reduce vapor pressure, or implementing thermal mass pre-warming. Waiting until full-body shivering begins means your system has already failed catastrophically. Recovery requires significant metabolic energy you may not have to spare. Now let's address the ultralight backpacker's objection. Elevation layers add weight. This misunderstands weight versus consequence. A standard 20x 72-inch closed-cell foam pad weighs 14 ounces. That's less than 1 additional liter of fuel you'd burn trying to stay warm through shivering all night. It's less than the weight of emergency bivy sacks carried just in case. More critically, those 14 ounces prevent a cascade failure. Better sleep preserves calories, which reduces food weight tomorrow. Preserved calories maintain cognitive function, preventing navigation errors that could add miles to your route. Maintained cognitive function prevents poor campsite decisions that could expose you to wind or moisture. That 14-ounce pad isn't weight. It's risk mitigation with compound returns. And it's not the only lightweight elevation option. Military surplus wool blankets, still available for under $20. Weigh 24 ounces, but provide R3 of uncompressed insulation that resists moisture better than synthetics. Spare clothing can create elevation. Stuff your empty backpack with spare clothes and place it beneath your pad's hip zone. This isn't ideal, but it's better than nothing, and pioneers survived on worse. The principle isn't about perfect gear. It's about understanding that any elevation buffer beats direct ground contact when the earth is frozen. We must also confront tent floor limitations, the false sense of security provided by bathtub floor designs. Many four-season tents feature 1,500 millimeters waterproof-rated floors that block liquid water beautifully. They do nothing to block conductive heat loss. In fact, that waterproof coating often contains polyurethane, a material with higher thermal conductivity than nylon alone. Your tent floor isn't insulation. It's a moisture barrier that happens to be in direct contact with frozen ground. Worse, condensation from your breath pools on that floor beneath your pad overnight, creating a liquid layer that dramatically accelerates conductive heat transfer. A floor with visible condensation beneath a sleeping pad can increase conductive heat loss by up to 45% compared to a dry surface. The solution isn't a thicker tent floor, it's eliminating the condensation source through ventilation and blocking its path with a ground cloth beneath the tent. Pitch your tent on a natural density snow platform. Place a silnylon ground cloth beneath the entire tent footprint, extending 6 inches beyond the edges. This blocks ground moisture migration while allowing the tent floor to breathe upward. Then place your hybrid pad system inside. You've now created 3 distinct layers between your body and frozen ground. Ground cloth blocking environmental moisture, closed-cell foam providing uncompressed elevation, inflatable pad providing comfort loft. Each layer addresses a specific failure mode. Together, they create redundancy. So if one layer degrades, others compensate. Let's examine historical where ignoring ground freeze proved fatal, and where respecting it enabled survival against impossible odds. The 1846 Donner Party didn't just suffer from starvation and snowbound isolation. Survivors' diaries describe sleeping directly on cabin floors that froze solid despite indoor fires, waking with limbs numb and circulation impaired. Those who survived longest were those who improvised raised platforms from available materials, stacking firewood beneath blankets, building crude bed frames from broken furniture. Contrast this with the 1911 to 1912 Antarctic expeditions. Roald Amundson's team reached the South Pole and returned safely in part because they slept on reindeer hide pads placed over layers of loose snow inside their tents, creating elevation and leveraging snow's insulating properties. Robert Falcon Scott's team, using similar era gear but sleeping directly on ice with minimal elevation, suffered catastrophic frostbite and exhaustion that contributed to their deaths on the return journey. Analysis of their equipment logs shows Scott's team carried sleeping pads with comparable R values to Amundson's, but Amundson's team understood elevation and moisture management. Technology wasn't the differentiator. Thermal strategy was. These aren't ancient history lessons. They're physics case studies with direct application to your next winter trip. The ground doesn't care about your gear budget or brand loyalty. It only responds to thermal gradients and material properties. Now let's discuss the metabolic cascade of ground-conducted heat loss, the physiological domino effect that begins the moment your pad fails. Minute 0, your hip contacts compressed pad area over frozen ground. Minute 5, local skin temperature at contact point drops from 91 degrees to 84 degrees Fahrenheit. Minute 10, cold receptors trigger vasoconstriction. Blood vessels narrow to preserve core heat, reducing circulation to that hip area. Causes local tissue temperature to drop further, triggering shivering thermogenesis in adjacent muscle groups. Minute 40, shivering spreads systemically as your hypothalamus detects core temperature decline. You're now burning 400 calories per hour just to maintain temperature, calories you likely can't replace. Minute 60, cognitive function declines measurably. Decision-making slows, risk assessment falters. Minute 90, fine motor skills deteriorate. You struggle to operate stove valves or zipper closures. Minute 120, shivering becomes uncontrollable, exhausting your glycogen reserves. This cascade isn't hypothetical. It's documented in cold exposure studies, and it begins not with air temperature, but with conductive loss at ground contact points. Preventing that first 5 minutes of localized cooling stops the entire cascade. A simple closed-cell foam layer beneath your pad prevents minute 0 contact cooling. Pre-warming your pad system with thermal mass prevents minute 5 skin temperature drop. Luxuries. They're metabolic preservation tactics that maintain your most critical survival asset, functional cognition. Let's address a dangerous, modern misconception. My pad's R value exceeds the required minimum for tonight's temperature, so I'm safe. This calculation ignores 3 critical variables. First, required R value isn't linear with temperature. Dropping from 20 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit doesn't require 50% more insulation. It requires approximately 80% more because heat transfer increases exponentially with temperature differential. Second, your personal metabolic rate matters. A 130-pound person with low body fat generates less basal heat than a 200-pound person with higher muscle mass, requiring higher R value for identical conditions. Third, and most overlooked, ground temperature often differs dramatically from air temperature. On clear winter nights, radiative cooling can drop ground temperature 10 to 15 degrees below air temperature. Your weather app says 15 degrees Fahrenheit. Soil beneath your tent might be 5 degrees. Your pad rated for 15 degrees is now critically undersized. Pioneers didn't calculate R values, they observed ground behavior. They knew that when breath vapor froze instantly on the ground, direct contact meant danger regardless of air temperature. They built raised beds, not when thermometers hit a specific number, but when the earth itself signaled freeze depth through visual cues, hoarfrost patterns, soil hardness, animal behavior. Modern campers can adopt this observational intelligence. If you can't press your boot sole into the ground without significant resistance, assume ground freeze has created a thermal sink requiring elevation strategy, regardless of what your weather app claims. Now let's build your complete ground freeze defense protocol, minute by minute from camp setup to morning wake-up. Hour 1 after arrival, don't pitch your tent immediately. First, assess ground freeze depth by probing with an ice axe or trekking pole. Begins 4 inches of surface, plan for elevation strategy. Hour 2, prepare your sleep platform. On snow, cut platform at natural density without stamping. On frozen soil, clear debris but avoid digging. Disturbing soil exposes moisture layers that freeze harder overnight. Hour 3, place Silnylon ground cloth beneath entire tent footprint. Pitch tent. Inside tent, lay closed cell foam pad first. This is your elevation and compression resistant layer. Top with inflatable pad. Critical step, place a dry wool sock or thin fleece layer between the 2 pads. This wicks any moisture migrating upward from the foam layer, preventing it from reaching your inflatable pad's underside. Hour 4, before sunset, boil 1 liter of water. Fill stainless steel bottle. Place bottle inside sleeping bag at foot level for 10 minutes to pre-warm system. Hour 5, perform moisture check. Wipe any visible condensation from tent floor before lying down. Enter sleeping system wearing dry base layers. Place second thermal mass bottle at your core, wrapped in cloth, after you're settled. Morning protocol before exiting bag, air out pad system for 5 minutes to release accumulated vapor. Wipe any condensation from pad surfaces. Store pads unrolled with valves open during daytime to allow moisture escape. Never pack them damp. This protocol adds 7 minutes to your evening routine but prevents 8 hours of metabolic drain. The math isn't close. Let's discuss gear selection intelligence, not what to buy, but how to evaluate pads through the lens of ground freeze physics. When shopping, ignore the headline R value. Instead, ask 3 questions. First, what's the pad's thickness when fully inflated? Anything under 2.5 inches will compress to near zero loft at hip, shoulder pressure points on frozen ground. Target minimum 3 inches inflated thickness. Second, what's the baffle structure? Baffles, running head to toe, resist compression better than vertical baffles because body weight distributes across multiple chambers rather than collapsing single columns. Third, what's the bottom laminate material? Matte finish exteriors resist convective air movement better than glossy finishes, reducing ground convection pumping. These details matter more than R value alone. And always pair any inflatable pad with a dedicated closed-cell foam pad rated minimum R2, not as backup, but as integral system component. Think of them as chassis and suspension in a vehicle. One provides structure and reliability, the other provides comfort and refinement. Neither works optimally alone in extreme conditions. This isn't gear snobbery, it's system engineering based on thermal physics that hasn't changed since pioneers raised their beds off cabin floors. We must also address the psychological barrier, our cultural expectation that sleep systems should be set and forget. Sells us pads with impressive specs that promise comfort without effort. But ground freeze doesn't respect convenience. Surviving it requires active management. Just as pioneers actively maintained their raised beds by replacing worn willow lacing or adding extra quilts during cold snaps, your pad system requires the same attention. Check it at midnight. Is condensation forming beneath it? Add ventilation. Is one hip cold while the other stays warm? Shift your position or add clothing stuffed beneath the cold side. Is your pad feeling less lofty than at bedtime? This indicates internal moisture accumulation. Place a dry shirt between pad layers to wick moisture. This isn't failure, it's engagement. The pioneers who survived winter crossings weren't those with the best gear, they were those who paid attention to thermal feedback and adjusted accordingly. Your ability to read your sleep system's signals, cold spots, moisture patterns, loft changes, is more valuable than any single piece of gear. And you'll sleep warmer in marginal conditions than others with superior equipment but passive attitudes. Let's examine the moisture migration timeline, the invisible process that degrades pad performance over multi-night trips. Night 1. Your pad performs near rated R value. Condensation forms on tent floor beneath pad but hasn't penetrated laminate. Night 2, microscopic moisture migrates through pad pores, coating internal baffles. Effective R value drops 15%. Night 3, accumulated moisture begins pooling in low spots of pad interior. Effective R value drops 30%. Night 4, moisture freezes overnight, creating ice crystals that abrade internal laminate. Microtears develop, accelerating future moisture intrusion. Night 5, pad feels consistently damp, loses significant loft, effective R value drops 50% or more. This degradation happens silently. You won't notice until you wake shivering on night 4 or 5. Proactive management. Each morning, unroll your pad completely and hang it over a pack or branch for 20 minutes to air out interior chambers. Wipe exterior surfaces thoroughly. Store it valve open during daytime travel to allow vapor escape. At camp, place it on a dry surface, not directly on snow or damp ground, while setting up other gear. These small actions interrupt the degradation cycle. Pioneers couldn't air out foam pads, but they rotated bedding materials and dried them by fires. You have lighter, more effective options, but only if you use them. Moisture management isn't optional in winter camping. It's the difference between gear that performs all week versus gear that fails catastrophically on the coldest night. Now let's discuss emergency improvisation, when your pad system fails and you must create elevation with available materials. This isn't theoretical. Pad punctures happen. Unexpected cold snaps occur. Your ability to improvise. Elevation could save your life. Priority 1. Create any air gap between body and ground. Clothing and place beneath hips, shoulders. Not comfortable, but better than direct contact. Priority 2. Leverage natural materials. In forested areas, gather spruce boughs. Layer them thickly, minimum 6 inches, beneath your pad. The trapped air between needles provides genuine insulation. Indigenous peoples used this technique for millennia. In open terrain, dig a shallow body-shaped depression in snow, just 3 inches deep, then place pad inside. The surrounding snow walls block wind, while the depression creates micro-air gaps at pressure points. Priority 3. Thermal mass redistribution. If you have hot water, don't just place bottles in your bag. Place 1 bottle beneath your pad at hip level, wrapped in cloth, to create localized radiant barrier against conductive loss. This isn't ideal, but it addresses the failure point directly. Remember, any elevation beats none. Any dry layer beats damp contact. Any radiant heat source beneath you beats none. Elevations won't match your planned system, but they'll prevent the metabolic cascade that leads to hypothermia. Pioneers survived not because they never faced equipment failure, but because they understood principles well enough to improvise solutions from available materials. Let's confront the final myth: ground freeze only matters in extreme cold. This is dangerously false. Conductive heat loss through ground contact begins degrading sleep quality at temperatures as mild as 40 degrees Fahrenheit, especially on damp soil or packed snow. You might not shiver, but you'll experience restless sleep, frequent awakenings, and morning stiffness. All signs of low-grade conductive heat loss preventing deep REM cycles. Studies of winter campers show that even at 35 degrees Fahrenheit, those using hybrid pad systems with elevation layers achieve 28% more deep sleep than those using single inflatable pads. Why does this matter beyond comfort? Sleep quality directly impacts next-day performance. Increases exertion by 17%, reduces navigation accuracy by 22%, and impairs risk assessment equivalent to a 0.05% blood alcohol concentration. On a multi-day trip, these deficits compound, leading to poor route choices, inadequate hydration, and increased accident risk. Preventing ground-conducted heat loss isn't just about surviving extreme cold. It's about maintaining peak cognitive and physical performance across all winter conditions. The pioneer who built a raised bed at 30 degrees Fahrenheit wasn't over-preparing. He was preserving his ability to hunt, travel, and make sound decisions the next day. Your pad system serves the same purpose, not just preventing hypothermia, but preserving expedition capability. As we approach our conclusion, consider this synthesis. Ground freeze isn't an enemy to defeat with better technology. It's a physical reality to respect with intelligent design. Pioneers didn't invent raised beds because they lacked good sleeping pads. And because they understood that elevation solves multiple thermal problems simultaneously: compression resistance, moisture management, convection blocking, with zero technology beyond wood and cordage. Your modern gear gives you superior materials, but not superior principles. The physics that made 18 inches of air gap life-saving in 1856 remains identical today. What changes is your ability to implement those principles with lighter weight and greater precision. A 14-ounce closed-cell foam pad creates the same elevation principle as a Pioneer's wooden bed frame, just optimized for portability. A vapor barrier ground cloth executes the same moisture management as a Pioneer airing his mattress by the fire, just optimized for speed. The wisdom isn't obsolete, only our connection to it has frayed. Rebuild that connection not through historical reenactment, but through understanding why elevation works, then applying that understanding with whatever materials you carry. Takeaway shouldn't be a gear checklist. It should be a mental model shift. Stop thinking of your sleep system as bag plus pad. Start thinking of it as body plus insulation plus elevation plus moisture management. Each layer addresses a distinct heat loss vector. Remove any layer and the system degrades non-linearly, not by the R value of the missing component, but by the cascading failures it enables. Your bag stops convective loss. Your top pad layer provides comfort loft. Your bottom pad layer provides compression-resistant elevation. Your ground cloth blocks environmental moisture. Your pre-warm protocol eliminates initial thermal shock. All 5 elements work synergistically. This isn't complexity for its own sake. It's systems thinking applied to thermal physics. The same thinking that kept pioneers alive through winters that would break unprepared travelers. You don't need their exact tools. You need their exact understanding. And that understanding weighs nothing in your pack. Next, perform this simple test at home. Inflate your pad fully. Place it on a cold tile or concrete floor, your proxy for frozen ground. Lie down for 10 minutes. Now stand up and immediately feel the pad's underside where your hips contacted it. Is it noticeably colder than untouched areas? That's conductive heat loss in real time. Now place a closed-cell foam pad beneath your inflatable pad and repeat the test. Feel the difference in underside temperature. That's elevation working. This isn't theoretical physics, it's tactile reality you can verify tonight. Knowledge without verification remains abstract. Verification transforms knowledge into instinct. The kind of instinct that makes you automatically add that foam layer before winter camping, not because a video told you to, but because you've felt the difference with your own hands. Pioneers developed their techniques through similar verification, through cold nights that taught lessons no manual could convey. Privilege those lessons safely, at home, before stakes become survival. Honor that privilege by testing, not just believing. Remember this when you're lying in your tent at 3 a.m.